Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Debra Eckerling, author of Your Goal Guide and creator of the Deb Method. I specialize in goal setting simplified and event outcome optimization. And every Sunday night, I lead the Goal Chat Twitter chat. And then on Monday, I bring in friends to dive deep into the topic. And then Thursday, it magically becomes an episode of the Deb Show podcast. So whether you're watching live or the replay or listening to us, we're glad you're here choosing yourself and your goals. And I've got great guests today. I always say that because I always do. And we're going to talk like the powerhouse, the nuts and the bolts of writing, but not just writing, the passion for writing and its place in the world and whatever else we want to talk about. So today we have with us Kristin Marguerite Doidge. And I love this. We met like 6 years ago when I spoke for USC writing writing workshop. And you reached out with your new book, which I'm really excited about. It's Nora Ephron, a biography. And you're going to talk more about that. But this is why it's great to have a live show, because you never know when someone's going to drop back into your life and say, hey, let's talk and let people watch. And also we're joined by my friend Joan Gelfand, who's zooming in or StreamYarding in from San Francisco. And Joan is an author, an activist, a poet, and everything else. So really glad to see you both. I'm going to give you all both the opportunity to introduce yourselves. So Kristin, let's start with you. Who are you? Why are you here? And why do you love writing?
Yes, thank you so much. Who are we and why are we here? What a great question. Coming off of writing a biography, that's been very present. So I have been a writer my whole life. I think pretty much since I was 5 years old, always wanted to be an author. And as you mentioned, the book is finally here. I spent 7 or 8 years on it, give or take. Obviously, I was working during that time, but it's definitely been a labor of love. So I love talking about writing with other readers and writers, and of course, also with my students. I teach at LMU as well.
Well, great to see you. And so it's like this big relief. How long had you been working on this project?
Yeah, it started as my master's thesis in 2014. So so it's been a while. It's part of my life at this point, for sure.
And why this topic? Why this person? Why Nora?
Right. Oh, so many reasons. I got really interested in Nora and her work because I was in journalism school and I realized that she had this whole other career, like sort of first life as a reporter before she became a filmmaker. And I just thought that was fascinating. And I really felt like, she's someone that we lost somewhat recently. At the time, it had only been 2 years, but really that should be celebrated and talked about more in scholarly conversations too. I actually started with an academic press, so maybe we'll get more into that kind of publishing stuff once Joan is joining us in the conversation. But yeah, I mean, she's one of these people who wrote in every genre possible over like 5 or 6 decades. So yeah, she's a pretty special person. Yeah.
Well, and as are you for like bringing her to the forefront.
Thank you.
So Joan, gonna swap you in here. Welcome. Thanks for returning to Gold Chat Live. Who are you? Why are you here? Why do you love writing?
Well, I'm here, Deborah, because we met through the WNBA, which I always want to give a little plug to, which is the Women's National Book Association. I was president of the San Francisco chapter and then president of the national organization that has 11 chapters around the country. And I also started the National Writing Contest. So I've left a good legacy with Women's National Book Association. And at the end, we can talk about how to get in touch with them. I started as a poet. I have 3 books of poetry, many publications in journals. Then I branched out into short stories and have a book of short stories that won an award. And then I kind of felt like I figured out the keys to the kingdom. And so I wrote this book, How to Be a Winning Writer, the 4 C's of Successful Authors. And the subtitle is Craft, Commitment, Community, and Confidence. This was published by Mango Press 4 years ago. And I've been teaching and talking from this book and coaching writers for well over 10 years on what I feel is a winning strategy for getting published and getting your work out there. 2 years ago, my first novel was published, and I'm excited because I just did my first live reading from this book, Extreme, yesterday. When the book was published, it was the pandemic, so we did Zoom events, but it wasn't as much fun as doing a live event. So this book is set in a Silicon Valley startup, and it deals a lot with women in tech and the struggles and the excitement and what it means to be in a startup. So my novel came out, and now I'm working on a memoir of Berkeley in the 70s, and I'm fingers crossed, but I have a publisher that might be interested in that. So the writing life, same thing, what you said. I was glad that you mentioned Nora Ephron worked in several genres, because I also review books and write essays. I'm a member of the National Book Critics Circle. So I kind of, as someone once said, and I adhere to, writers write. So when we're not writing books and we're not writing novels or poems, it doesn't mean we're not writing. We're still writing a book review or an essay or a blog post. So that's my life. Yeah.
And something that and it's not so much interesting, although maybe, interesting, but everybody is a writer. You cannot be in business or really exist in this digital age without having some sort of content-y kind of presence. So whereas we're all authors here and freelance writers and everything else, even people who might not even identify as a writer is a writer. What do you think? No?
I don't agree.
Oh, please disagree with me.
I don't agree, only because, well, I know there are many aspiring writers, and I certainly teach them and coach them. And I see people getting caught up with all kinds of stumbling blocks that I try to help them get out of the way. But I also meet many, many people who say, I really admire that you can put words to the page, because it's not something I can do. So you're probably, because you work in the goal space, and a lot of people who have goals to become speakers or media personalities, they do often have to write a book and to have a platform. But in general, I think there's a lot of folks out there who are, they know that they don't have the skills. So I think we need to give ourselves a pat on the back for being able to do something that not everybody can do.
Okay, now I feel like I need to not necessarily backpedal, but maybe even differentiate. Because writing is a skill, whether you're a book author or not. Let me try this again. Even people who are not book authors, everybody needs to write to some degree in their daily life. Not everyone is an author, but everybody needs to write for their job to some level. Can we agree on that one? Maybe. No, maybe not. Okay, Kristin, help me out here. What do you think?
I had the exact same reaction Joan did, because again, this could very quickly become a super philosophical conversation as well as practical. I love it. I mean, I think being a writer is different than writing, right? And like the edit I would say also is that everyone can be and is a storyteller. We all have stories within us. I think that's lovely. A lot of people are very skilled at telling them, again, going back to Nora and her life, being really into improv and comedy, and like her roots being in like telling a good story that has a great punchline, things like that. So to me, not everyone who considers themselves a comedian or, you know, whatever it is a writer. Whereas, you know, it's just such a special thing. And I would also say, and I think Joan would agree, and you would, Debra, that anyone can be a writer if they aspire to be, you know, like it is a skill, and it is a you know, something that can be learned with tenacity. And then there's also talent, you know, like natural born storytellers. Again, like there's just some people who are put on this planet to be writers, and it is very special. And not to make it a negative, but I do think that we have a tendency, because we all learn to write as students when we're young, to devalue it, you know, as an art form, to sometimes assume or you know, kind of, again, as we've seen the proliferation of content in the digital space, it feels less like it might be considered less special. And I do want to also, as Joan said, really recognize the incredible hard work that it takes to really be a skilled writer, as opposed to someone who creates content and things like that, which again also takes skills. But I guess I'm also wanting to differentiate somehow, I think.
To Debra's point, I just want to say, in the white collar world, yes, people have to write emails, write reports. My husband is a tech guy that writes the most beautiful emails and reports, but he knows he is not a book writer because he has no interest in sustaining a narrative. And even, and I think Kristin will agree, you know, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, you know, you need to have that stamina to take your concept all the way, you know, beginning, middle, end, you know, and it's much different writing a book than writing 1,000-word blog post or a 500-word blog post. But, you know, good on them who are expressing themselves in the shorter mediums. It's awesome. You know, I think one thing that's happening right now is that a lot of companies are finding themselves faced with employees who really don't have writing skills. And this goes back to what's happening in the schools right now. But I don't know if you want to go there, but it is a bit of a crisis that people coming out of college, while they may be able to code, they may not be able to write a strong email.
Well, there is a whole big thing with soft skills. This conversation comes up a lot, and people need to be able to communicate, which is one of my big things is, if ever anybody asks me for advice for young adults, I always say talk. You know, do public speaking classes. I did competitive forensics in high school, and then that was like my social life in college. But if you can speak, if you can communicate, then those benefits leak all over everything else that you do. So I think it is a bigger conversation. So writing in terms of authorship, yes, a huge, big deal. Writing in terms of life, it's still a big deal, but a different kind of a big deal. Can we agree on that one? Okay. So
good negotiation.
Okay, good. Well, you know, I like it when agree to disagree, but also agree to agree. Yes. Because it is really a challenge and not everybody who writes in one form is talented in writing in another, which is another like big deal. Oh, great. I can write social media. I can write blog posts. Maybe, or maybe it's just a completely different art form. So what is it about writing? Why do you write? I feel like it's a trick question, but one that you both know the answer to. So, Joan, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, I think for me, the impetus, well, because I do so many different kinds of writing, don't forget I also journal every day. So there's writing for my private life, and then there's writing for my public life. And I think the impetus for writing for the public life is like, oh, I have an insight into something that I don't think everybody has had the same insight. So I want to write because I want to share this, just like this, writing this book. It was like, I think I have kind of developed a strategy that isn't out there. So, I mean, this book is 200 pages or whatever it is, but believe me, I've written thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, but it's not all for the public. Right. And the same thing with my novel. Oh, and same thing with Nora Ephron, I'm sure. Just like you have an insight that you want to share with the world, that's an angle that isn't out there yet. I mean, that's, for me, that's the impetus for putting it out there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Kristin?
Yeah, I think the most honest answer would be to write is to live. Like, I wouldn't know what it would be like to not write. Like, writing chooses you. You don't choose writing. Mm-hmm. At least that's my experience. And yeah, I mean, like I said, for as long as I can remember, I had a pencil and paper. That's just who I am. And yeah, it's one of those things that can be so painful in the moment as you're doing it. And then it's also really wonderful. Like, I had gone to this really great Writers Guild panel a few months ago, and Bill Lawrence was talking about writing Ted Lasso with Jason Sudeikis. And he was saying that someone in the chat had written, I love writing or something. He was like, I have to call out this person in the chat. No one loves writing. Everyone loves having written, which I loved. And it's so true, because a lot of times it does feel really, really hard. And you're like, why am I doing this to myself? I at least have moments like that pretty often, especially with something that's that lengthy, like a book. As Joan said, it is a different kind of stamina that you kind of have to develop as far as being committed, to the story, to the subject, to your own interest in it and all of that. And so, as far as like why write books, I think maybe that's a different thing, but writing is just, to me, I feel the most alive when I'm writing. So I think that's just the bottom line there.
I mean, I don't think writing could have a better answer than right? Because and the same for me. I've been writing since I started writing stories, telling stories as a kid. For me, that's always been my thing. But one of the I should use this. When people ask you a question, what is something people don't really know about you? I never use this answer, but I probably should. Growing up, I only wrote fiction. I did so much creative writing. That was my thing. And then after college, I got my first freelance break literally a week after I wrote my first draft of my first screenplay. Back when I was living in Chicago, you want to move to LA, you have to have the screenplay on the passenger seat. But I got that writing break and I started freelancing, and that's what came more naturally to me. And so I had been freelance writing for many years, and I self-published 2 books before Mango released her Goal Guide at the beginning of 2020. So for me, it's my identity, as it is for most people who identify as a writer.
Yeah, for sure.
That's how we met, because of Mango Press.
Yes.
Brenda put us together. Yes,
I believe it might have been like a Mango party or something.
Yes.
Virtual. But this is, and I say it's one of the blessings of the pandemic, because I've met more people in the last 2.5 years or so than I ever could have met in a lifetime of meeting people face to face. And again, it also gives me the opportunity to reconnect with people. So here we are. So why do you write books, Joan? I like Kristin's edit of that question.
It's a great question. I know a lot of writers. I hope this isn't tangential, but I know a lot of
I hope
writers.
it is. Go on.
who are very happy writing articles and publishing articles and have no interest in putting themselves through what it takes to write a book. And they're like, I'm a writer. I have 100 articles published, or 20 poems, and they're really satisfied. To me, I think I just came out of the gate with big ambitions, and so I knew that I had to, well, yeah, I mean, the difference between being an aspiring writer and a published writer really is the book. It really makes a big difference career-wise. And I think I wouldn't have written my first novel if my teacher hadn't said, just keep writing. I never had an aspiration to write a novel until I was in a workshop where the teacher said, you have a novel and just keep going.
Yeah. And I've done National Novel Writing Month a couple of times just because I love the pressure to get drafts done. So every now and then the creative writing me, the novelist me does kind of like pokes its head out. But for me, writing is to inform and inspire. And a book is a wonderful platform for that. Now I'm going to ask like a really, what's the word? I don't mean to be controversial, but I'd love to know what you think, especially Joan, but you, Kristin, about the whole self-publishing industry. I have my own thoughts, which I may or may not chime in on.
Did you ever have experience with that?
Well, I self-published my first 2 books, and I self-published them on purpose. So my first was Herbal Pencil Adventures, Writing Prompts for Kids of All Ages, because I was goal coaching, but also helping people write books. And I wanted that experience to write a book, so I'd have that to bring with me to work with my clients. And then my second book, Write on Blogging, 51 Tips to Create, Write, and Promote Your Blog, I maybe could have tried to sell that one, but because of everything in the blogging world changes, I think like 2 days before I released it, this was 2016, Blab went under. There were a couple other, it was dated the day it came out because everything was ever so changing. So for me, it was knowledge I wanted to get out in the world, and it made sense for your goal guide. It made more sense to go mainstream because it is a mainstream title. And fortunately, Mango showed interest. I love the story. End of 2018, and then it came out in the beginning of 2020. So 6 weeks before the world was, if it would change by circumstance, out comes my book to help people embrace change. By choice or by circumstance. So I know I'm supposed to be answering the questions. I think, but I will give my answer because I've already kind of led into it. I think it's a tool. It's something that if you really want to get a book out in the world and either haven't looked for a publisher or want to do it on your own, fine, as long as it's professional. But by the same token, there's a trend of people using self-publishing that's not. See, this is just a hot button issue here. People in the business world who see books as an expensive business card, go for it, if this is what you want. But again, it's a different kind of writing than the journeys that we were talking about before. And now that I said I might not give my answer, I kind of did. Joan, what are your thoughts?
Here's what I tell people as a writing coach. Self-publishing, if you want to put the muscle behind it to market it and sell the books, it's really nothing more than, like you said, it's an expensive business card, right? There's a lot of problems with it. It's not honored by the literary world. You can't get your books reviewed. You can't get into a bookstore. And so your outlets are basically, your friends and family and networks to sell your book to. I never went that route because I always wanted to have the stamp of approval of a publisher. And I think that has served me, just like it will serve Kristin to have a traditionally published book. Traditionally published books can go into libraries, bookstores. So I kind of discourage people from it because I think people think, oh, I'm going to publish this book and I'm going to put it up on Amazon and, I'm going to sell a few thousand copies. And it's like, it's not that easy to sell a few thousand copies, unless you're very lucky. I mean, there are some books that have been self-published that went viral, like 50 Shades of Grey, but she had quite a platform. So as my husband always says, you can't judge by outliers. One book out of a million that went viral. So yeah, I tend to caution people against the investment in self-publishing unless they think they have the muscle and also the stamina to market it. Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on this, Kristin?
I do. I think it's interesting. I think the same question applies when you're starting a writing project, whether your goal is to have a traditional publisher or to self-publish, which is, why am I writing this book? Like, who is it for? Why can't it be a series of blog posts? Why isn't it a podcast? That kind of thing. And I had helped some really wonderful Silicon Valley founders ghostwrite a book a few years ago. And they really did feel very passionate about putting forth their philosophy. And that was the idea of the book. And it wasn't really about necessarily selling copies. It wasn't like to become book authors so much as it was to be thought leaders. And in that regard, I think we accomplished that, and they've had a series of really successful funding rounds since then and things like that. So I think if it makes sense, for you to like put forth your mission statement or whatever it is in a longer form, I can see why that would be really valuable. And it certainly makes sense in the tech world in particular. I do think this somewhat links back to our original discussion at the top, which was about being a writer versus writing. And I think I'm feeling like, at least for me, we're both wanting to have access, to have writing be more accessible, much more inclusive, much more diverse, while also holding on to the vestiges of something that is very special and different and unique and artistic. And so I think that there is that push-pull energy, going on within publishing. And a lot of that is still managed by the gatekeepers, and so it's like there's even the hierarchy within traditional publishing. Oh, you're not from a big five, oh, you're not from whatever the things are, and so it's like, we know that as women in publishing, that's even a thing. Pulitzer Prizes have not been given out to as many women as men, by any stretch of the imagination. So again, I think that this is an interesting thing. I do think that it's unfortunate because when you say to people, I'm working on a book, they don't know, are you someone who's talking about you're putting something out yourself, or you really have, gone through all of the steps and hurdles and hoop jumping to get an agent and or to, go through peer reviews at an academic press. All of that stuff is very different. And so I do feel very protective and proud of that. At the same time, I'm also wanting people to feel like, yeah, if you need to get your story out there, like, go for it, And we do know that Brene Brown is another example. She self-published her first book. So she's another one of these, like you say, she's an outlier. She's sold millions of copies of many, many books that you're like, it's one of those things. And I also always remind myself, especially before the book came out, Joan Didion had published, there wasn't, really self-publishing back then other than, like zines and stuff like that. But she had a pretty small publisher published her first book, as did Nora. She had written a biography about Johnny Carson that is out of print. And as Joan said, she sold about 10 copies. So that always made me feel a little bit better. Like, it's okay. It's okay if your first book doesn't do that well, you know? And again, it's like, what am I doing it for? Is it for the writing? Is it to get the story out there? Or is it to sell a bunch of copies? Because again, this is another like super interesting publishing conversation, I think, that happens with agents and publishers. And I'm sure Joan has thoughts on, which is like, again, this stamina, you know, this idea of like, are you a novelist who wants to just kind of write novels and never do anything with them? Or are you a person that's really gonna, you know, this expectation now that we are also involved in the commerce process very much, you know, before, during, and after, to bring readers in, to bring fans in, to bring people to book events, things like that. And so it is a really interesting kind of process that's changed and evolved, and obviously is continuing to as we speak.
There is definitely a trend of using books for marketing. And those books aren't necessarily of the quality, but the desire is there. So it really is, what are the different pieces? One thing that I always recommend is that I don't care if you're planning to self-publish, write a book proposal, because then you will have your framework. And you will have your book proposal if you decide to go that route. But even if you don't, you have this information. And it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of this particular answer, Kristin, which is, why are you writing this? What is the impetus behind it? So do either of you have a writing project you've always wanted to do, but you haven't quite gotten to?
I'm working on that now, actually. Now that I've got 6 books behind me, I finally have the opportunity to write this book that I've been wanting to write for a really long time. But I'm older than both of you, so you know, I got to start doing the things that I've always wanted to do, right?
Well, I don't think people need to wait to do the things that they've always wanted to do.
Absolutely.
I think that, well, and that's the big thing that I do with goal setting, is when you look at the life you want, what does that look like? And if you can't make the big changes, what are the little changes? What are the little goals you can set that's going to bring joy into your life? So good on you for doing that, Joan. And Kristin, what about you? Do you have a thing that keeps niggling in your head someday, or was this it?
This was it. This was it for a long time. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's always more, you know. Yeah, things popped up in the process that I thought that would be an interesting follow-up or second book. And then I also thought I was crazy, because I'm like, it's so hard. Just write the one book and be done. But that's not possible. That's not a thing. It'll be something. I also want to like probe a little bit of this idea that creative writing is different than nonfiction, you know, because I suspect and know from knowing you, Debra, that your writing is creative. And why does it have to be different? You know, why is fiction different than nonfiction? You know, I think that's super interesting too.
That is interesting. And you're right. Nonfiction is very creative. I mean, my goal book has a road trip theme. There's creativity in there as well, for sure. That's a really good point. And I think it goes into prioritizing. And I've told this story before as well. The first version of my podcast was the Guided Goals podcast. And I had to put it on hold because I really wanted to write this blogging book. And the blogging book was not going to get done when I was hosting a weekly podcast. So I put a pin in that. So I think that's the other thing with, I think, all projects, not just writing projects, and especially those of us who, when we write, that is our job and our passion. So we've got the different aspects of our writer life. But part of why I write fiction is because I love sharing the stories of others. And that's what I do with my freelancing and with my book and the things that I do under the banner of goal setting and event outcome optimization, my newsletter. All that is for the purposes of motivating people to move forward. So there are definite reasonings for both, but you're right. I sit corrected. There is creativity in all that I do because I love this idea of when you're a writer, you can write like any one topic is at least 5 different somethings, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is straight out of Nora's mouth. That's not something I came up with, but her whole life was about determining where that line is between fiction and nonfiction. And one of the things I learned studying her and talking with people who worked with her was that she actually didn't see very much of a difference between the screenplay and writing, and being a reporter, and everything is story, and so like, I think that's just a really fun takeaway when I was teaching a literary nonfiction class a few years ago, to really like bring back in that energy and passion from when we were kids, that's like one of the first things we learn is like writing a story, beginning, middle, and end, and reading stories, and so I love that. I think that it's just a really fun and cool way to tap back into like who we are as people, that it doesn't have to be, even if you are writing a report, like Joan said, it can be really elegant and eloquent. And yeah, I love that. I love the idea of like infusing creativity and artistry into the simplest of tasks,
I like that too. So Joan, what do you think?
Well, I agree with both of you wholeheartedly, but I will also say that for me, writing my nonfiction book was much less arduous than writing my novel because the novel was world building, right? I mean, I was writing what I knew. My novel, I was imagining what different characters would say and do and respond in different situations, and trying to create a dramatic arc. To me, it was just more challenging. But I have read nonfiction. I remember reading a book about Venice, and even that book that was written about by the Wall Street Reporter about Theranos, Bad Blood, about what was her name, Elizabeth, the one who was up for trial because her startup did all kinds of terrible things. That read like a caper, right? I mean, that book was so exciting, and it did have a real narrative arc, and every page it was a page turner. But I think maybe because my writing book was more instructional, it just flowed a lot easier because I had been teaching everything that I was writing about, so from experience. The world building to me was really hard. But in nonfiction, it's all about the research, like Kristin saying it's about story. It is, but the nonfiction writers that I know, the research that they do is just epic. Poring over source materials and in strange locked libraries, and private collections of people's letters. And, but there's people who love that. It's like digging through, it's like being a detective, right? You're like, looking like what you did with Nora.
Yeah, but even with detectives, like, again, the writer part to me is like, what does it all mean, so like you can have all of the material, and it's like, but what are you trying to say with it, and so I think that is a really interesting dynamic, like you said, with novelists too, like you said, like what is the point of this chapter? What is the idea of this person's journey, or that kind of thing? And yeah, definitely becoming, like you said, more interested in world building and nonfiction. I think that's just fascinating. And it's definitely something that readers and publishers really want more of. You know, we're into this true crime genre again, and that kind of thing, you know, the sort of Truman Capote version of things, you know. And so it's like really interesting because, again, a lot of us, I especially, thought that I had abandoned sort of creative writing a long time ago, fiction writing a long time ago. I'm like, I'm not a screenwriter. That became painfully obvious when I took a screenwriting class. But then I became a journalist, and I realized, like, it is in the creative writing that you can really stand out and say something different, you know, if that's the kind of writer you want to be. And yeah, I would love to learn more of that, you know, like you said, Joan, just being really imaginative with, you know, where was this person when they wrote this letter, you know, and like, why are these words redacted in that report, you know, and all of that is super interesting. So, yeah.
So the steps to being a writer start with decide what kind of writer you want to be, then what you want to write. Is that accurate?
Maybe the opposite.
Okay, continue.
What do you want to write? And for whom and why, I guess. I don't know. I guess it depends on the project. I don't know. I feel like Joan will have a more succinct and logical way. I mean, nothing about this to me is logical. So I need to read your book and see what what the actual steps are.
I highly agree with you about the logic. I had a business career for 20 years before I devoted myself to writing full time. And I always say, you know, it's so frustrating because in business, if you do X, Y, Z,
Yes.
you know, 90% of the time you're going to get the result. In the creative life, you can do X, Y, Z, but you don't always get the results. So that's why in my book, I have a whole section on confidence, because so many things can shake your confidence when things don't go the way you think they should go. And a lot of being out there in the public is about timing, just like Deborah's saying, you know, her book on goal setting comes out in the pandemic when people are sitting there going, now what am I going to do with my life?
Right.
So I want to go back to your original question, though. Will you state it again?
What is if someone's looking to be a writer, what in your expertise is the order? And I'm saying order, like order actually matters, but I'm finding this conversation, A, completely different than what I anticipated it being, and B, you know, even better, right? Because and this is why I love doing this kind of a show, because you don't know. We all have our own body of work, our own perspective, and it's fun to kind of compare notes and share inspiration.
You know, I want to say something. I did want to address that, which is I think it really depends on how early you get your advocates in your career. So, for example, all of my books have been published with independent presses. It's only now, 6 books later, that I actually have an agent who's going to help me design my career. But I know people who've had an agent since their early books and who say, you know, I've written 10 books on crime and I want to write something else, but my agent keeps putting me in this direction. So I think it really depends on if you have a publisher that you're devoted to or an agent that's devoted to you, I think then you are a little bit more pigeonholed, so to speak, you know, than when you're on your own working with independent presses. Or of course, self-publishing, then of course, you know, you can write whatever you want. So I think it really depends on the trajectory and who's on your team.
And if you don't have a team, you get to be team yourself.
You're your own
That sounded
team.
right?
You're your own team.
Okay, so let's say we've got people tuning in who always felt writing was just too overwhelming. These big, massive book projects. And when I put this up as the podcast, it might just be on conversation on book writing and other things. What is the first step for someone who always wanted to be writing, really writing? Joan?
I think this is really an important question, Deborah, because I think people have sparks of ideas that don't always translate into a full-fledged book. So, and I'm sure you found that with the Nora book. It's, you might have had a spark, but then it blossoms into so many other aspects. You can't just cover one aspect of her life if you're going to write 200 pages, right? And so I think that's one issue. Like, does your idea really have legs to go the distance? And, different writers, because I've listened to interviews with writers and talked to writers for over 20 years, different writers have different approaches. Some writers will not write their first page. And I've heard this from, who wrote The Name of the Rose? He's really a famous writer. He's Umberto Eco. He says he spends over a year working out the architecture of his book. Like, he has to know everything about that book before he'll write page one. Myself, I kind of get a broad brush stroke and dive in. And I figure if I lose the thread at page 80, like I did with my master's thesis, okay, it never became a novel, but it was 80 pages. So, and a lot of writers do, they'll go down the road and realize this is not a whole book. It's just not. And so, either you're cautious and you architect it out and you have all your plot points. And like you said, Deborah, write your book proposal so that you have your roadmap and you know that you have a book, or dive in and take your chances. Definitely two different, it's personalities, right? It's some personalities are more comfortable with just, whoo, I'm going.
Well, and so there's also the conversation, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? I always say I'm a plotter who pantses, or a pantser who plots. You need a little bit of both.
Panter? What's a panter?
Oh, writing by the seat of your pants?
Oh, a panter.
I've never heard that before. That's funny. I like that.
Okay. Well, I think it's common in the National Novel Writing Month world. You have a month to write a novel, which I think is a great exercise for anybody who just wants to get words out of your head. You can cheat. You can use it for nonfiction. You can use it for blog posts. You can use it for stories. But using that as a motivation to get a lot of words out there at once. But there's a lot of conversation behind it. Do you plan for your nano novel, or do you just dive right in? So that's where the origin that I've heard. So Kristin, what do you think? What is the first step?
That's a loaded question.
I
the
know.
first step.
You're welcome.
The first step is, like, Joan has alluded to a few times, having someone who believes in you, and maybe that's only you, but it's so important. It's hard. It's really hard to be a writer. It's hard to do a lot of things, but it's hard to be a writer. And I think you got to start somewhere, like, I'm definitely a person who believes in both. Like you said, I think having some structure, some outlines, some concept of what it is you're trying to do is obviously really helpful. But there is also that element of, sitting down and getting 100 words on the page, and then getting another 100 words and then another, and then realizing you can do this, and I do always struggle with the whole sit down from 9 to 12, and see what comes out kind of thing. I found it not easier. Nothing was easy about writing. I found it more helpful to have like a word count in mind. I know that Nora stuck to a word count, a page count, like 2 or 3 pages of the screenplay before she'd go on to the rest of her day kind of thing. It does require commitment. It is a little bit of a fallacy to imagine, that it just kind of happens. It is a commitment. And I think that's obviously part of it. But I think the idea of keeping scraps of paper and keeping things that inspire you and taking notes and having small things that might become a thing. I love that. Yeah. Speaking of controversial, I want to say something, but I don't want to say it. I had seen the Woody Allen documentary after having watched the really powerful documentary, where his adopted daughter or stepdaughter, had spoken about abuse. And so I hate to kind of highlight any of his writerly tips, but he had tons of scraps of paper that had become like, this is the title of a movie. I don't know what it is yet, that kind of thing. So I feel very validated by that, because I have lots of scraps of paper from the time I was a little girl that I'm always like, well, I have to keep those just in case they become something. And it's like, they're not anything brilliant, but you never know, so.
Well, and I love the scraps of paper philosophy, but one of the things that I teach is keep them all together. Keep
Definitely.
all of your ideas, whether if you're a big handwriter, keep it all in a notebook. If you're a big typist, computer, whatever person, have a dedicated computer document, something in the cloud. So whenever you get a brilliant idea, it's there. And that way, when you're ready to be brilliant, you don't have to look around for the scraps of paper.
Definitely. Yeah.
They're definitely all together. Well, yeah. I love this conversation. And again, we never know what I feel like quoting Forrest Gump, life's a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But the point being, really good, deep conversation on the different types of writing, what it takes, and where to start. And on that note, I would love for you both to gift a goal to our audience, something that they can do today, tonight, tomorrow to start writing or write better, or, whatever sort of writing goal tip you want to give. Joan, do you have a writing goal to gift?
I would challenge our listeners to think about 5 places where their work might be published.
Okay. And then what?
And then what? Oh, yeah. And then submit them. Submit their work to, start getting that muscle toned up to get the work out there. Yeah.
One thing that Kristin said a few moments ago, have an advocate, someone who believes in you, even if it's just you. So I love how this goal really is a nice little callback to that. And I edited a little bit to say, don't just think about 5 places where your work might be published. Write them down, then submit, and start toning that submission muscle.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. What do you think, Kristin? What do you
I was gonna start so teeny tiny.
Oh, please.
For those of us that are like, I just don't even know, I'm frozen. My thing was gonna just be like, literally take out a piece of paper, start a Google Doc that says like the title of the project or book writing notes or something that gives it substance, that's like, this is a thing I'm doing, save it on your desktop or, put it on top of your notebook, whatever it is. But I think just starting somewhere, like literally having a document that means like you have an expectation that you're going to fill out this document.
I love that. I'm going to edit that goal too. I hope it's okay. I like I think we should double dip here. Start that idea document, whether it is a notebook or a Google Doc or whatever. And also start that project, the one that's been niggling at you that you can't get out of your head. Give it a title and commit to it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So,
and it can be tiny pieces. It can be 100 words here and there, to start. But but yeah, whatever it takes to get going,
Well, I think that's it, and it appears from the comments we've been inspiring people right and left. So, for those of you who are tuning in live, we appreciate you, and we're happy to help. Where can people find you, learn more about you, Kristin?
I have a website, kristinmarguerite.com, and chicagoreviewpress.com has all the info about the Nora book and all the events we're doing, all of that good stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. And Joan, where can people find you?
Same thing. I have a website, joangelfand.com. And all my books are there and links to the publishers and all of that. Yeah.
Excellent. And you can find me. I'm at The Deb Method everywhere. And if you go to thedebmethod.com/blog, you will be able to read the recap and the highlights from this fantastic conversation, and also watch the replays and recaps of the previous episodes. Ladies, what a wonderful conversation. Let's leave people with just one or two more kernels of inspiration. Do you have a final tip or words of wisdom, Kristin?
Take it a day at a time, in life and love and writing, be patient with yourself, be gentle.
I like that. Be patient. Patience is a virtue not many writers have.
Not many people have.
Oh, that's true too.
But it's a thing for sure. Yeah.
Take it a day at a time. Be patient. Love it. And what about you, Joan?
I would say the same, adding, if you really believe in your project, stick with it and set your goals, but also be flexible. So, if you don't meet your goal 1 month, 1 year, just regroup.
I agree with that completely. Because, well, with me, so the Deb Method is determine your mission, explore your options, brainstorm your path. So it starts with, why are you doing this? And if things change along the way, be flexible. But when you know the mission behind what you're doing, again, you could be a plotter and a pantser at the same time. You're going a path, but you have your wiggle room, so you stay focused and forward moving.
Love it.
So thank you so much, Joan, Kristin, for joining me today. For those of you who tune in, thank you for choosing yourself and your goals and taking the time to get hopefully inspired and motivated. Again, I'm Debra Eckerling, and you can catch me every Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific on your favorite social media platform where I stream, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. You want to write? Great. You don't want to write? That's fine too. But if you have those writing goals, go on out there and go for it, because we know that you can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.